Hi everybody, this is Kate Haley with Glazer's Camera, and today we're excited to bring you a fun, in-depth, deep dive look at the Fujifilm camera system. This session is called the Power User Training for Fujifilm Mirrorless, and today we have Michael Bobenko from Fujifilm who's on the chat with us, and he's going to be doing the primary part of this session. And we also have Luis Navarro, who's going to be hanging out with me in the YouTube chat, answering questions along the way. During this session, if you have questions, please feel free to post those either on the Facebook page or in the YouTube chat room, and we're going to answer some of those probably during the chat, but also we'll ask some of those on air throughout the session. So don't be shy. This is a great opportunity to learn a bit more in depth about some of those Fujifilm menus and buttons and dials that you've been curious about. So with that said, I'm going to send this over to Michael. Michael, I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about your role at Fuji and talk a little bit about what we're going to learn today.
Hey, thanks very much, Kate. Thank you, Glazers, as well. I would love to get up to Seattle right now. God, I actually miss travel. So I've been with Fujifilm just shy of 30 years. I'm the professional markets training manager. So I do primarily lean towards professional cameras versus some of the more consumer ones. But the whole point of this is to try to explain as much in depth on how to get the most out of your Fujifilm cameras, whether it's the X series or the GFX. They have a lot of things in common, but then there are certainly differences. I have done this class now for many, many years. I've been updating it as it goes. So first of all, please bear with me. I've tried to anticipate every single possible question you have, but like Kate says, there may be some things that you might want to ask in chat, but just hold on maybe, because I might be getting to that 5-10 minutes later, okay? We can't talk about every single feature in just 2 hours. This is the stuff that I think is gonna help you the most. These are the questions that come up the most. The first, I was gonna say about hour to maybe even the first 90 minutes are going to be about buttons and menus and operation. Towards the end of this, I'm going to get into some more tech geeky stuff about the way the sensors work and raw processing and camera tethering and stuff like that. If you're not interested in any of that stuff, you can just drop off at that point. I do want to apologize. I'm using a cheap little crappy webcam here. So I don't really look as orange as I may look on your screen right now. I have a Fujifilm X-T3 that is focused on all the cameras for the hands-on. That's being the other webcam. So you're not actually going to be looking at me, because mostly this is going to be about the PowerPoint slides and the close-ups of the cameras. So having said that, I am actually going to go to my screen sharing, and you guys should be seeing the beginning of my presentation. And I will switch to the other camera so you can see my hands on. So I'm just going to start with a helpful quote for those of you.
Okay.
This is, like I said, sort of a power user class. I'm trying to make all of you better photographers, better users with our system. Henri Cartier-Bresson was a famous photographer from about the 1930s up through the 1960s. And this is a brilliant quote, I think, from his. So don't be afraid to practice, and don't get discouraged. Just keep shooting, because you get better, okay? He had another quote that which was, obviously he said this long before Photoshop existed, but he basically said, see the picture in your head before you even bring the camera up to your eye. And I find that very, very useful advice. In October, if I remember, Kate, we're doing a class called photography, and I spent a whole 2 hours discussing what this is all about on the graphic design and photographic composition and how to make picture taking better no matter what camera you use, okay? It has nothing to do with being a Fujifilm user. That class in October is strictly about improving your photographic skills.
Yes, so look for the updates on that on our website soon. We'll have the event page soon.
Yeah, that's still down the road, but just so you
Yeah.
know. All right, so quick review of Fujifilm, the Fujifilm ecosystem for basically this is 90% of our cameras all have this kind of stuff in common. Again, there are nuances, but you know, for the most part, you know, you've got shutter speed up here, you have ISO, um, aperture on the f-stop on the lens, menu, joystick, stuff like that. So for those of you who just need a quick refresher, manual exposure, let me switch to this other camera. When you want to do manual exposure with, say, the T series, here's your shutter speed. Here's your f-stop. On the lens, there's a letter A. A means auto. Okay, so if you put the lens on A for auto, that means you're in shutter priority. Okay, shutter priority. If I'm on an f-stop and I put the shutter wheel on A, there's an A there. That means the shutter is in auto, which means I'm in aperture priority. Okay. If both the lens and the shutter are on A, that means I'm in program mode. So the camera is making all the decisions for you. So otherwise, in either A mode, the camera is going to be making an automatic exposure judgment depending on which priority you've set, okay? The cards, you know, most of the T series have two card slots. The X Pro 2 has 2 card slots. Some of the cards are UHS-2 capable and cameras, and some of the cameras only use UHS-1. To show you the difference is, if you can see, this card has only 1 row of contacts on it. This card has 2 rows of contacts on it. All right. The one with the 2 row of contacts is called a UHS-2. It's the UHS-2 protocol. And you can't see it, but there's a little Roman numeral 2 on the card itself. So the UHS-2 cards, excuse me, are capable of being about 3 times faster than the UHS-1 cards. And this doesn't mean you have to use a UHS-2 card, but the cameras that are capable of accepting the UHS-2 cards will give you much, much faster operation. But some of the cameras like the XT200s, the XT 10, 20, 30 series don't have the extra contacts built into the camera themselves. So even if you put a UHS-2 card in that camera, you won't get the extra speed, okay?
Today's webinar, I'll just turn on the camera and say hello as well. So today is all about organizing your catalog. So basically the plan for today is...
Okay. Where was I?
Sorry about that.
Yeah. No worries.
I don't even know what.
So all the cameras also have on them a Q menu somewhere. Somewhere there's a button labeled Q. I'll go into detail about that. Q means quick. I say the quick menu is your best friend. All right. It saves you a lot of deep menu diving. But the settings that are basically in the Q menu really basically only affect your JPEG files. Okay. Raw file on any of our cameras is always a pure 100% raw file. Okay. Don't freak out. Even if you're looking at the camera and you're seeing a black and white picture in your camera, your raw file is a raw file. You can do whatever you want to it. All right. Shooting mode, which is referred to by many cameras, we call it the drive. So on some cameras, it's up here, like in the T series, it's up here underneath the ISO. On some cameras, it's a button that's labeled drive. All right, we'll go into more depth about that, but just giving you a quick overview of basic operations. So that is all you need to know at this point to start shooting with our cameras. If you're a new user, haven't even turned the camera on yet, that's all you need to know. Why is it not going to the next slide? Okay. Focus operation. I am going to switch cameras to my, hang on a second, to my close-up camera. So on the other screen, my face should have gone away. You should see a whole bunch of cameras down here. So this is a smattering of what I'm going to show. Hopefully, we won't be dealing too much with some of the older cameras. These are from the XT2 and up.
Yep.
This one is an extra special camera. This is a special limited edition that we have that has no menu screen on it. Yeah, no menus.
Hey, Michael.
How do you do that? Well,
Michael?
because this
Hey, Michael.
is a, yeah.
The light is a little bit hot on that. Can you turn your light down a little bit, or your exposure?
Yeah, I'm going to have to get out of that.
A little bit. Yeah.
All right, hang on a second.
Sorry.
I'm going to have to stop the video on that.
Sorry, guys. We just want you to be able to see it a little bit better.
There we go.
Yeah. That looks a little better. Thank you, sir.
Where was my special edition? My special edition camera that has no menu screen on it is a good old-fashioned Fujica ST901 film camera. All right. I just thought I'd show that to you because that's what most people buy our X series cameras for, is for that nice retro design. All right. I'll get that out of the mix. We were talking about focus operations. So the cameras either have a rotating SCM lever on them, single continual manual, continuous, or on the X100s, you have SCM on the side slider. Go into focus stuff later. The zoom lenses, almost all of them have optical image stabilization built into them. Sorry, let me get you this one. So like this one has a switch, says OIS, all right? The only zoom of ours right now that does not have OIS is the 1655 2.8. And only two of the primes have OIS in them. That's the 200 millimeter and the 80 millimeter. But of course, we've got IBIS built into some of the cameras now as well. And then AF choices, single, spot, and zone. We'll get into that also more in depth. But I am going to explain something right now before I forget. And that is a focus mode that goes by the name of all. So we have three choices of how many focus spots you see on the screen. And that's the single point, the zone, and multi. The word all, even though it makes you think, well, it's using all the sensors on the LCD. Well, they all use all the sensors. All is simply a way to see the stuff on the screen. So here I am in the Q menu. I'm going to choose all here. And I know there's some glare there. I'm going to try not to. So when I've got all selected, that means I can use the back wheel. I can use the back wheel to change through the different modes without having to go in and out of that. So if you can see, it's going from single to zone to multi. I will explain all that in detail, just giving you a quick primer on what the word all means, okay? Why does... All right, so basic operation overview, again, just refreshers. So on the XT10, 20, and 30 series cameras, there is a setting on here. It's up here where the shutter speed is. There's a little lever that goes to auto. The lever word says auto. This particular thing basically makes it a really, really dumb point and shoot camera. I shouldn't say dumb, makes it an intelligent point and shoot camera. But this is basically for you really, really don't want to have to think about anything, or say you want to give the camera to a child, and say, hey, take our family picture. You just want to hand it to them. You don't want them to mess up any of the settings. That's what auto does. However, auto locks you out of a lot of options in terms of camera control, okay? So be careful with that. So I tend not to use that because I tend to want to operate my camera with more detail. But one of the things that putting it into auto does is it does give you, it puts it into something that's called the scene recognition mode or scene position mode. And this is the camera makes different kinds of exposure and color balance choices for you based on built-in logic in the camera. And these different scene recognition choices that you can access are things like the portrait mode, the action mode, the landscape mode. And this gives the camera sort of an idea of what kind of logic to apply when it's doing exposure choices for you. All right, here's a biggie. So simple, so vitally important for those of you who maybe have only had your cameras for a little bit, but even I find some of you have had the cameras for years, didn't know we do this. This is actually something that people love about us. We are really, really, really good with firmware updates. We actually just had some in the last 10 days. So they're free. What they do is they will fix things on your camera. They will add new features to your camera. And what's really good is we even still support cameras that are no longer made. Now, we only go so far back, like for example, with the XT10s, no, there's no more firmwares for the XT10s. But, you know, there might be, say, for the XT20. I don't know if there are, but if the engineers can find a way to fix something, they will. So all you have to do is you don't have to memorize this web page. You can just, search for Fujifilm firmware updates. It takes you to that page. And there's firmware updates for both the bodies and the lenses. And
yeah, and the easy search for that, Devin was just reminding me, is just searching for fujifilmfirmware.com. Boom. And it redirects you to that longer link.
Yeah. So I'm going to show you the fast way to do this. You can do this through the remote camera app. However, the remote camera app has been known to be a little glitchy with firmware, so I don't recommend it. This is the tried and true method. It never fails. So you go to that web page that's on the right, you find your camera or you find your lens, and you will download the file onto your computer, okay? Take that file is going to have a DAT extension, all right, .dat. So it'll show up in your downloads folder or your desktop, wherever you want it. Do not rename that file in any way, shape, or form. Also, sometimes people will download it and then they'll lose track of where they put it and they'll download it again. And when you do that, your computer is going to rename the second file because you can't have duplicate file names on your computer. So it will put like a parentheses 1 next to the file name. And then you'll try to use that DAT file and your camera won't know what it is because it's been renamed. So watch the naming carefully, but take that file, put it onto an SD card, any SD card. It can be an SD card with pictures on it. It doesn't matter, but put it onto the root level of the card, right onto the top level, not the image folder, not the DCIM folder, okay? You take the card, you then put it, actually there's one in here, it doesn't matter, okay? Put the card in your camera. The camera's turned off. Put a finger on the display back button and hold that button and then turn the camera on while you're still holding that button. And it would really help to have one that has a battery in it. Okay, so hold the display button while you're turning it on, keep that button depressed, and the camera will give you this white screen, which I'm sorry is blown out, but what it says is firmware upgrade, and it's going to give you information about continuing. And then all you do is you follow the on-screen instructions. It's that simple. It takes all of about 30 to 60 seconds, depending on how big an update it is. And you will do it for your lenses and the body. So when you do it for the lenses, the lens obviously has to be on the camera body, but all you need to do is swap lenses, put it on the body, and then do the firmware update for all your lenses. So it does help things like autofocus functions, and it does give you better capabilities. I talk about cleaning your sensor. So our sensors are remarkably good about not getting dirty. All right. I actually got an email about somebody that complimented us on that and said, you guys should talk about it because we seem to be very good at repelling dust. But they do get dirty. So the first thing you do is in the camera menu is you go to sensor cleaning, and you can have that set to automatically clean the sensor every time you turn it on, turn it off. It's up to you. I don't find it's necessary to have that on all the time. And what that does is it shakes the sensor at a very high speed. It's an ultrasonic, and it gets most of the dirt off of it. If it's still dirty, oh, and by the way, I should tell you is how do you know that you have dirt on the sensor? Well, it's a spot that is always in the same place on every single image, okay? If the spot moves from one place to another, that's not dirt, that's a bird. But if it's always in the same place, and it usually will be out of focus a little bit, that is dirt, and you're gonna have to clean it off. So if the shake doesn't work, get one of those rubber squeeze bulbs, and all you gotta do is get in there with the squeeze bulb, blow a little bit of air on there, and again, 90% of the time, that will get it off. If that still doesn't work, you can use canned air, all right? I'm going to switch to my face cam here. Listen to me, this is Michael Wilbenko telling you that you can use canned air. Officially, the company recommendation says not to do that. I've been doing it for years. Know tons of photographers that have been doing it for years. The trick to canned air is not to shake the can when you're spraying it. So get the nozzle in there, little short burst. Do not hold the can sideways. Do not hold the can upside down. Just little short bursts, and get that nozzle not on the sensor, but close to your dirt. It will work, all right? But again, that's a personal, I'm just telling you personally, I do it a lot. Officially, the company says don't do it. So, lastly, if you really need to clean it with a wet method, get things called PEC pads or something called Kim wipes. And at the camera store, buy a solution called Eclipse. Eclipse is basically pure methanol. But you buy the sensor swabs, the pre-made sensor swabs. I just buy those now. I got tired of making my own. Put a couple of drops, no more than 2 or 3, of the Eclipse solution on the swab. And then if this is your sensor, all right, you take the swab and you're going to sweep the sensor with it. Just sweep like it's a broom. Do not drag back and forth. Sweep up across once and then sweep down. And then carefully look at the sensor and wait for it to dry and see if the smudge is gone. The reason I say do not go back and forth is because if you actually have a piece of physical dirt that's on there and you trap it on the sensor, you're dragging it back and forth, you're going to risk scratching the coatings on the sensor, okay? So sweep it, and it works. If that still doesn't work, now you got to send it into service or take it to your dealer to have it cleaned by them, okay?
And Michael and everyone tuning in, I will let you know, we do services here, so we can service your camera, we can do sensor cleanings, and in general, if your camera needs repair, Glazer's is here to help handle those things. We have an in-house team too, so just wanted to share that.
Yep. When in doubt, let somebody else do it for you. So, oops. All right, the Q menu. I'm going to go back to my other camera view. Like I said, the Q menu is your friend. This is what it looks like on my slide. You can see this is what it looks like literally on all of our cameras, even the medium formats. This is 99% of the stuff that you are going to want to get to and change when you're shooting. There's really no reason to be going into, the main menu button unless you're really making major changes. I basically go into the main menu button for general setup stuff, and I almost never go back there. I go to the Q menu a lot. All right. Now, what's cool about the Q menu is you can customize it. And the way you operate the Q menu is you simply highlight whatever, you use the joystick or your D-pad, you highlight whatever item it is, and then you use the back wheel to change what's on there, okay? So the Q menu is very simple to operate. But you can customize the Q menu. And the easiest way to customize your Q menu, and this is with almost all the cameras, is you go to the Q menu and you press it in. Instead of just tapping it, all right, you're going to press it in and keep holding it for 3 seconds. And it will say, select custom setting. And then you will go to whatever item you want to change, all right? And you will highlight it, and it takes you to the a quick menu setup window, and then you can choose something else to make that item. So as you can see on my slide, like in the bottom right corner, I forgot what that default, I think that was LCD brightness. I made it my microphone setting for microphone volume, okay? So very easy for you to customize a Q menu, and you can move those things around. So if you don't like where the white balance is located, you can move it somewhere else, okay? Now on the XT200, which is this guy, I'll turn it on. The Q menu, there is no button for Q menu. You have to get to this from the touchscreen menu. You have to hit the Q that's actually on the screen to get there, okay? So that's how you get to the Q menu, all right? And the other way, and then so like the other way is to actually go into the main menu itself in the wrench button dial setting. And this is how you would do it on the XT200 is you have to go into the main menu to edit the quick menu. You can't do it through the shortcut because there isn't one. So you can choose how many items appear on the Q menu with the more recent cameras. By default, there are 16 items. There's 4 across and 4 down. You can choose to make it 4, 8, 12 if you want less. And some of the cameras also let you set up a separate Q menu for movie functions that are separate from still functions. Another new thing that we did is by default, the background on the Q menu is simply black. You can change it to transparent. So depending on how you're, if you're seeing the screen, if you look at the thing that's in the bottom here of my this page, you can see there's actually an image visible behind the Q menu items. That's just kind of cool, and it lets you see things as you're making changes. It lets you see things on the image in the background if you don't want black. You can also memorize certain custom settings in the Q menu. So in the Q menu, let's see, like in this particular screen in the upper left corner where it says base, that's the basic presets that it comes out of the box with. But there are custom sets labeled C1, C2, C3, C4, depending on how many. And these let you set up certain things that you want to go back to on a regular basis. So you could set like one custom setting, it's a particular film simulation with a particular white balance. If you're shooting at daylight, and you can set one up for tungsten, and it's just a way for you to go back and forth in setting those things up, okay? So like I said, by the XT200, you gotta hit that button. That's the main menu screen on the XT200. Now, there's also film simulations. I'm going to get to film simulations more in depth. The film simulations are really critical to the operation of our cameras. It's something we're proud of. On the, you can choose them by way of the Q button. All right, it's down here. All right, and of course, there are default settings with some of the D-pad settings like like this, the one on the left, the D-pad. If you use the one on the left, it brings up film simulations. But on the XT200, again, you're going to do it through touchscreen, and there are two separate touchscreen choices, whether it's through the main menu or whether it's from when you actually touch the film simulation button that's on the main menu. Now, something that's really cool is if you see is the screen on the left, there's a split screen, and it shows you, oops, sorry about that. It shows you what the current film simulation is you have set. And then in the right, as you scroll through and choose different film sims, it's going to show you what the new film simulation will be. So that's kind of cool with the XT200. I do like that. It makes it very, very easy for you to see stuff. But even on the T series and something like in this camera, you can see right now, I am in a black and white film sim. If I use the left button, oh, sorry, it's not black and white, but I can choose the film sims, and the picture in the background does show me what the film simulation looks like. There's a thing called the My Menu setting that we introduced a couple of years back. This is a little shortcut menu. Like I said, if the Q menu is the stuff that I go to for the most, but you can go and create your own little mini menu on the camera that becomes your default menu view. And what I mean by that is once you set up the My Menu, is if you hit the actual menu button, instead of going to the main menu, it will default to whatever you put into My Menu. So if you've added things to My Menu, like if you see on the right, it says My Menu setting. This is giving you a list of choices to things to put into the My Menu. It's a limited number of items, and it's just something that you say, these are my favorite things that I want to get in the menu. Once you set up My Menu, it will become your default. You can still use the main menu, but it will always pop up My Menu first. Now, we've got all these buttons on the cameras, right? So things like auto exposure lock, AF on the front of the camera. There's this black button here. You know, where's my XT30? Some of them are marked, some of them aren't marked. These are by default function buttons, all right? Meaning when you press it, it takes you to some kind of operation. Those function buttons, we programmed at the factory to do different things, but they can also be changed by you. You can choose what they want. Now, the menus item that I'm showing on the left, that's got the yellow highlight, that's sort of the older look. That's the XT to T1, T2, T10, T20. The bottom right screen is the way it looks now. It's not yellow anymore. It's white. And it's part of the setup menu in the menu wrench. And we call, it's in the button function, it's in the, it's called the function setting. And I want to point out something else back on the earlier one is there's something here that says selector button setting. So that item doesn't exist on the newer cameras because this was for the cameras like the XT2. Where's my XT2? Or the Pro 2. Pro 2 has a joystick. What did I do with my XT2? So for some cameras that you, the T1, the T10, where didn't have the joystick, they have this, what we call the D-pad or the directional pad, where that would be how you move autofocus. Okay. You could change that to not be autofocus, but you could change it to be from function to be autofocus only. Okay. When we introduced the joystick for autofocus, this became basically unnecessary. So that's why that went away. But selector button setting means you can change the function selector to be autofocus only if that's what you want, but then you lose the ability to access functions through that. So in button dial setting, you can change that. So you either go into the menu and go into the wrench and go to button dial setting and find something called function buttons, okay? Or we have a handy shortcut that's in our cameras, which is holding in the display back button for 3 seconds. So here's an XT3. And remember how I said you do that. If you do that with the camera turned off, it will take you to the firmware update. But if the camera is on and you hold it for 3 seconds, it pops up this special shortcut for function settings. Okay. So if you saw how I did that, you hold it down for 3 seconds, boom, it pops up the function settings. So this is really, really, really so simple. The camera it shows you, it points to all the different function buttons on your camera that can be programmed. And for the newer cameras that have touch screens, that also includes swiping up and swiping down and left and right, because these swipings are considered to be buttons. So they act like buttons. So when you select something, you go to the right and you have a whole multiple list of choices of different things that you can assign to that button. It's very simple. Very, very handy, useful. This is so easy because now you can customize the camera to work the way you want it to work. Okay. What are some of the kind of things that, I'm sorry, now the XT200, I want to go back and highlight because this was done to be mostly a touch interface camera. You have to do this through the main menu because pressing the display back button will not get you there. Okay. With the XT200, it will not take you to the button shortcut. All right. So, what are some of the things that you should do with that? So here's one that I recommend for any of you guys that might be, say, wedding photographers, in particular, or event photographers. There's a very handy setting in our cameras called preview exposure in manual mode, and it's usually on by default. And what that means is when you are setting the f-stop on the camera manually and you're setting the shutter speed on the camera manually, what you see on the what you're going to see on the screen is going to get brighter and darker, brighter and darker. All right, it's going to show you the preview exposure, which is good. However, when you're shooting with flash and you're usually doing that in a dark environment, well, if the camera's at say 2/50th of a second for flash sync and it's say f8 and you're in a dark wedding reception, you're going to have a hard time seeing anything. You're just not going to see much. So you want to be able to turn off the preview exposure in manual mode. So that's something that I say, okay, we'll set a function button, something like this one in the front, set a function button to be able to turn that on and off at will. All right, so it's very handy. That's the kind of stuff that I say that if you're a studio photographer, again, you might want to take advantage of that. Setting up your LCD and your EVF, really, really easy. You go into the menu, into the wrench. You go to something called screen setup, and then find an item called display custom setting. Display custom setting. Okay. So again, so it's the menu, the wrench, or setup at the older cameras, screen setup, and find something called Display Custom Settings. And when you look at that, you've got several pages of stuff to choose from, and you'll see things that have little check marks next to it. So it's very simple. If it has a check mark, it's going to be on your screen. If it doesn't have a check mark, it won't be on your screen. So if there's stuff on there that you just don't care for, like you don't want to know what kind of metering mode you're in, you don't care, uncheck it, it'll go away. The kind of things that I really always like is I love having the electronic level. I love having the electronic level on. It's so simple, it's so handy. And I always have my histogram turned on as well, because I find those things just invaluable. But feel free to check and uncheck things that you want or don't want, and they'll go away. Now, on the X Pro 2 or X Pro 3 and the X100 cameras, okay, because these have the option to have an optical viewfinder. So you can have optical or electronic viewfinder on these. You can set up the items on the screen to be different. Your OVF items and your EVF items can be set up differently, okay? Hang on a second. I'm going to change my exposure again. I'm getting a patch of sunlight on that screen, so I'm sorry about that. All right, so that's how you set up your screen. It's very handy. Now, back to film simulations. We've been around since 1934, and that's how long we've been making film. All right, we started making movie film in 1934. So you hear this term color science tossed around a lot. Well, it's a real thing, and we have found the ways to apply the looks from our different film types and even other manufacturers' film types directly into the cameras. Okay, and these are not just like cute little kitschy looks. All right, these almost 100% match the color reproduction and contrast situations you get of different film stocks. All right. Now, yes, this only applies to your JPEGs. And I love shooting JPEG, and that'll be something I'll cover in the last half hour. I almost never shoot RAW anymore. However, it also affects the RAW thumbnails. So if I've got a film simulation chosen, all right, so like this is Astia or classic chrome or black and white, all right, if I have it set to say Acros film simulation, okay, what I see on the screen is going to be a black and white image. And if I'm shooting only JPEG, I will get just a black and white JPEG. But if I'm shooting RAW and JPEG, or RAW only, even if I set it to RAW only, I'm still going to have just a black and white picture on the camera, okay? However, remember what I said, the RAW is always pure RAW. So when I get it into your image editor, it's not going to be a black and white file. You can do whatever you want to it. But what you see in playback might be a black and white thumbnail. So don't freak out. All right. And when you hit playback on your camera, so if you're shooting RAW and you hit the playback button on your camera, what will come up is going to be a black and white image, because that's the JPEG setting that you've got. That's a film simulation you have enabled. Again, your RAW file is still RAW. All right. But it has to build that preview based on something. So if you see from my screen share here, these are two extreme film simulations, very opposite. You can see much different in contrast and color. I strongly encourage you guys to do some testing with the film simulation. Don't just stick with the one that's default for your camera, which is usually labeled standard, and it's typically the Provia film type. Please try some different stuff. Just go out, walk around, or set up a bowl of fruit and some gray cards, some color patches, and try the different film simulations and see what they do. I think you'll find that you might very much like one far more than another, but it makes your photography easy, okay? Now, there's a couple of menu item settings that will determine what you see, again, in your EVF or your LCD. And you can actually turn off that film simulation rendering if you don't want it. If you remember what I said is if you've got black and white turned on and you look through the EVF, you're going to get a black and white screen. Well, there's two ways to defeat that. All right. So one is something called preview picture effect, which has been renamed to be called the natural live view. Preview picture effect, natural live view are the same thing, depending on what generation camera you have. And what this does is it will still give you the exposure preview. So as you're changing f-stop and ISO, right, and stuff like that on the camera, the picture will still get brighter and darker. But natural live view turns off the film simulation rendering and gives you something that looks almost exactly like an optical DSLR or optical viewfinder look. All right, it's much, much lower in contrast. There is no contrast settings applied to it, and there's no color rendering applied to it. Natural live view, some of you may really, really like it. For people, especially if you're going back and forth from, say, a film camera into this, and the digital rendering is too much of a shock for you, turn off the preview picture effect. Okay, so turning off the preview picture effect is the same thing as turning on the natural live view. This will give you something that is a much softer, more delicate look in your viewfinder. There's another thing in screen setup that is called the EVF brightness. There's a separate one for LCD brightness, but I'm very much a viewfinder person. By default, it's set to auto. I would recommend you go in there and set it to manual. And when you enable manual, it's going to give you this screen. It's going to say you can do plus or brighter or darker. Now you can actually make it as bright or dark as you want to suit you. I usually just leave it at 0. But the reason I take it off of auto is because for me, when I'm shooting manual exposure, I want to make sure that my screen doesn't do anything unpredictable. And when it's in the auto setting, the camera can use some of the metering information to brighten and darken that screen a little bit according to what it thinks is the ambient light environment. All right, so I prefer to set this to manual and I just leave it at 0. Okay, LCD color. Now, LCD brightness, if you are shooting in a darkened setting, you might want to set that darker. Like if you're shooting in a theater, or something like that, and you don't want playback to be bothering people, go ahead and turn the LCD brightness really low, okay? Now, some more stuff about film simulations. In the black and white modes, there's sepia. We recently added a tone adjust to the black and white settings. So this is in the menu under IQ, and it's called monochromatic color. So not all your cameras will have that, only some of the newer ones, but it's a cool thing. Now I'm showing on this slide a fairly ugly, really obvious, cyan green offset. And I did that just to show you what it looks like. But it is something that's kind of fun to play with. And this means that in camera, you get a black and white with a color tone to it. And you can set that to your heart's delight. Advanced filter modes. Advanced filter modes, I'm going to change this again. Sorry. When I set this up, there was no sunlight on it earlier, so I apologize. Advanced filter modes are cool things. And they can, if you have it set to advanced filter mode, and you don't know that you are, and you're getting weird looking stuff, that's why. The advanced filter modes are programmed into the camera. And when you're in the advanced filter setting, you cannot do any kind of image changing whatsoever. So on the T4, for example, it's here underneath the ISO, it says ADV, okay? On some of the other cameras like the XT200, again, it's ADV. Boy, that sun is really nasty. I don't have another place to put that. Trying to see if I can get that exposure adjusted. Where was I? So like on the XT200, it's up here on the mode dial and it says the letter ADV. On the XT10, XT20, it's also up here. There's an ADV1 and an ADV2, all right? Because you can have two of them set up in your menu on what the choices are. But I want to explain what they are. It's like I said, there's nothing you can do about changing what those things are. They are built-in image processing looks. Some of them are really cool, and I do use them once in a while, but you're locked into that, okay? So one of the things, like this one I had fun with. I hope you can see that picture. This is shot in the toy camera mode. These are real, this is at the racetrack in Austin, Texas. Those are real cars going about 185 miles an hour. I shot it with the that toy camera effect, and it just makes it look really fun. You know, it's not so it can break you out of your boring shooting mode. You can be artistic with them. Give them a try, but just know that you're locked into stuff. All right, we added some other new things called the grain effect. Yeah. We added some things now into more recent camera models called color chrome effect, the grain effect, and the color chrome blue effects, okay? So grain effect, be careful of. Grain effect is going to apply a grain to every single JPEG you take. Again, it won't affect the raw files, okay? RAWs are raw, but to all of your JPEGs, it's going to put a grain effect on there that you may or may not like. So if you have that turned on and you don't know it, and you're looking at pictures and they look really kind of noisy, it's because of that. So turn it off. It's one of those things that it's a gimmick. Some people like it. I have never used it because to me, you can always add grain later in post, but feel free to play with it. Now the color chrome effect is a little hard to explain. It is, it works. What it does is it enhances saturation and color detail. It really does give you more color detail, but you have to really look closely to your files to see it. The best example I give is if you're like shooting close-ups of flowers, for example, if you do a close-up of like a red rose, a flower petal, and you get it really tight and there's all the delicacy in the flower petal. The color chrome effect will help preserve that color delicacy, okay? What it does do, it does slow the camera down about 10%. It's just not a big deal, but it's because it's doing added processing to the file in the camera. So things slow down a little bit. There's a special version of that called the color chrome blue. And color chrome effect blue is basically like having a software polarizer on your camera. It only targets blue areas of the screen and it makes them basically darker and more richer. So when you're shooting landscapes with the sky and you want to enhance, you want to deepen just the blue of the sky, try turning that on. It's really nice. It helps. okay? But there are different settings that you have for that stuff. All right, back to camera operation. So the mechanical shutter, okay, on the cameras that have that. So these are, so it's a focal plane type shutter. These are whole stops, right? So it says like 15, 30, 60, 125 on there, right? Well, you go, well, I want 1/90th of a second. How do I get to 1/90th of a second? Or I want 1/200. I don't want 250. I want 1/200. So when you are set to any of these physical settings, okay, on the knob, with the back wheel, you can go in between. That's how you get. You can go 2/3 up and 2/3 down from whatever that physical shutter speed is set on the wheel. Okay, you probably didn't know that, but that's how you get to that. Now, if you don't like using the knob at all, if you come from another camera system and you're used to 100% back wheel operation from other manufacturers, take the back wheel, the knob, put it into the letter T. T stands for time. And now you can lock that button down. When it's on T, all shutter speeds are on the back wheel. Not just any 2/3, but everything. So from 1 hour all the way to 32 thousandth of a second is all on the back wheel if you put it on T. All right? That's mechanical shutter. Electronic shutter is something you would set in the menu, or you could do it by way of a shortcut button. You can switch shutter types. Are for shutter speeds that are above whatever the maximum mechanical shutter is on your particular camera. On some cameras, the maximum mechanical shutter is an 8,000th of a second. On some cameras, it's only a 2,000th of a second. So if you need to go above that, if you're really in bright situations and you're with, say, the 56 millimeter 1.2 lens and you're shooting wide open at 1.2, you may need to go higher than an 8,000. So you're going to need to switch to electronic shutter. And so that's perfect because you're going to get great exposure. The only thing you need to know about electronic shutter is you cannot shoot flash with electronic shutter. There is no flash sync with electronic shutter. It has to be in mechanical shutter only, okay? Also, electronic shutters, sometimes this is true of all cameras, can do some weird, give you weird artifacting effects where you can see either slanted lines or you can see zigzaggy stuff. Like if, say, and it's unpredictable. These artifacts are unpredictable. Sometimes you'll be moving the camera and you may get something that looks like a Z shape in the thing. And that's because the way the electronic shutter works is it reads the image from the top of the sensor down, all right, one line at a time. So things get scanned at different times, and that can give you some weird results. Mechanical shutter never does that. The setting on your camera in the menu, all right, where it says M+E, this is what I usually leave it on. And this is because I tend to be an aperture priority photographer. So that means I will set my shutter dial to A, and I'm setting the f-stop myself. So I'm going to let the camera choose the necessary shutter speed. When it's on M+E, it means the camera will automatically stay at mechanical shutter all the way up to the maximum level of my mechanical focal plane ability. And then if the meter says I need to go higher than that, the camera will automatically put itself into electronic shutter mode so it can give me the higher shutter speed. That's what the M+E setting does, okay? So that really only kicks in if you're in program mode or if you're in auto, okay? So if you're in mechanical setup, you won't get that. There's something called the electronic front curtain. The electronic front curtain is a hybrid between the actual electronic curtain and the focal plane shutter. So what it does is it leaves the front curtain open all the time, but it will actually close the exposure with the second curtain. So it's exposing the whole sensor at one time by way of blanking the sensor with the second curtain. But because the first curtain is left open, it shortens your release time a little bit. It's not a big, huge, major thing. We're talking 30 milliseconds faster. But if you are a hardcore sports photographer and that really, really matters, that might make a difference. So electronic front curtain does give you the fastest release response. However, it also only works up to a certain maximum shutter speed. So once you hit like about 640, 700, 750th of a second, it becomes mechanical only, okay? It also is helpful to release vibration a little bit, but you can go to electronic shutter and there's no vibration at all. The manual focus assist modes. These are really helpful if you're a manual focus photographer, if you're on auto. I trust the autofocus on these cameras, I would say almost all the time. Sometimes though, in low light situations, you find the autofocus is going to be missing or having a hard time latching onto something. Or sometimes your brain and your hand are more accurate than any camera's autofocus, okay? So manual focus assist, there are several different choices of what they are. It's in the, again, it's in the menu under AF/MF, and it's labeled assist. Now note the word assist. These are ways to help you visually decide if the picture is in focus or not, okay? Doesn't necessarily guarantee that what you're focusing on is sharp. It might be still a little bit off, but it gets you there real fast. And my favorite one is the peaking. I kind of don't like the other ones. I don't like the digital split. I don't really care for the micro prism. Play with them, you can like them, but the one I'm recommending is focus peaking. And what focus peaking does is it puts sort of a colored outline around anything that it sees that's high contrast, which then basically is telling you that that's something that has an edge to it. And if it has an edge, it usually means it's sharp. And it really, really does work. It's very cool. If you do a face, like if you were to try to focus on me and you move the focus ring, you would see that line move from my glasses, like back to my ear, back to my glasses. It is very, very useful. However, I suggest you put it on the low setting, not the high setting. High setting puts that colored outline like almost everywhere, and then it becomes not very selective, so what's the point? There is a really, really new addition, not really new, but since the H1, we added to the H and the T cameras and the GFX 100 that is called linear focus behavior, okay? And there's actually, I'm going to be on the Fujifilm Work from the Workbench YouTube channel next week. I'm going to be having one that explains this, but you're on that. I'm going to explain it now. So all of our lenses, the Fujifilm lenses, and with most other camera manufacturers that are using autofocus systems, the lens motion is dictated electronically. They're through a bunch of sensors that are programmed around there, okay? And when you turn the focus ring fast, the lens moves a lot. When you turn it slowly, the lens moves a little bit, okay? That's really good if, say, you're trying to keep track of something that's moving back and forth very quickly, and you need it to make gross adjustments. But it's not predictable, all right? What if you always want the lens to come back to the same spot, no matter every time you turn your hand to this position, you want the lens to go there. So that's the linear behavior. It acts like the lens actually has gears in it instead of being electronic. And so in the menu, it's in button, it's down in the button dial setup, and it's an item called focus ring behavior, and you set it to linear. I love this, I adore it. It's so, so good because now, especially if you're shooting video, every time your hand rotates to the same spot with manual focus, the lens will always focus on that exact position. All right, so it's not on all of your cameras, but it is on the more recent ones. All the cameras have something called instant AF that I find is very, very helpful. So even when you have the camera in manual focus, okay, so I have it set to M. If I press the AF lock button, all right, like on the T3, it says AFL. If I just press that button, the camera will automatically do a quick momentary autofocus for you. Again, even when you're set to manual focus, AFL will quickly do an autofocus for you on wherever your focus point is located. So that's really, really handy. So you can get the camera to get you there, and then you can use the focus ring to fine tune. So we call that instant AF. It's very handy. There's something called focus check in your menu. I love it and I hate it. So first of all, what focus check is focus check is a magnified view on your EVF or your LCD of wherever the AF box is located. So even when you're in manual focus, if I move that box around, all right, if I move it around, wherever it is on the screen that box is, when I do focus check, it's going to magnify the picture at that location. The easy way is by way of the back wheel. Okay, this back thumb wheel, when you press it in, it magnifies the picture. Press it again, it goes back to normal view. So that's really, really cool. It's very helpful, again, for getting your manual focus correct. All right. But if you go into the menu and turn the focus check on, all right, this makes the behavior automatic. And now every time I touch the focus ring, you just have to touch it. You don't have to turn it much. You can even bump it even when it's hanging on your shoulder. It's going to zoom in the picture automatically. That's when focus check is turned on. So that's why I say be careful with that, because you may put it up to your eye and not realize that it's actually magnified. But using the back wheel to zoom in and out of your picture when you're focusing is really, 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 really simple. So I suggest using that. There is also something called the dual view mode that you will find on the T series, the X series. And if you look on the slide here, the picture on the right, when you are in manual focus, if I go into my display back button and I press it again and again, several different times, it will take me to this dual image where on the left, you're seeing the whole frame. And on the right, you're seeing a magnified part. Again, that magnified part follows the focus box. So that's something you might like. Try it. In the cameras that have the optical viewfinders, like the X Pro series, so they have an optical viewfinder, all right? The lever that's over here on the right, this lever, will let you turn on a little tiny digital picture, video picture in the bottom right corner when you're in the optical mode. So if I'm in optical viewfinder with the lever, if you push that inward to the left towards the lens, that little video screen will pop up and go away, pop up and go away. And that video screen follows wherever your focus box is. So that's, again, very handy. It's meant to be a focus assist. Now, it will only do that when the camera is in manual focus mode. If you're in autofocus mode, you will not get that little video pop up. Okay. So let's talk about some of the different autofocus types. Face detection is really cool. All right. In some of the earlier iterations of our cameras, guys, can you switch the view to the PowerPoint, please? There you go. So face detection on the newer
Hey, Michael?
cameras. Yeah.
Could you stop and restart your audio? It sounds like it's a little, there's a little noise or something on that line. So could you just stop and start your audio again and see if that helps?
I muted, unmuted. How's that? Is it any better?
No, keep
Test,
going.
test, test. Hello?
Okay, hang on one second.
Keep talking.
Talk a little bit for us. We're just testing the
Testing
line
1, 2,
here.
3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Okay, we're
This
good. We're
Okay.
good. Thank you.
Okay.
And keep rolling.
Face detection. On the newer cameras, it's remarkable. It's just absolutely fantastic. It will lock on, it will track, it will find an eye. Even in video mode, it's really, really good. In some of the earlier cameras, it was a little more hit and miss. But the camera will, anything that it sees that it even looks like a face, it will go to it. And this is why I love it. And sometimes I love it and sometimes I hate it. If you are definitely shooting a portrait, you're doing some fashion and you want it to lock on this one person, it's great. But what if you're shooting a whole bunch of people? So the camera may not know which face to go to. It will default to whichever one's closest, but it may not necessarily know. Or if you're doing street photography, you're shooting something on a sidewalk, and let's say you see something that's on a table, like a sidewalk table, like some beautiful plate of food, and you're trying to get a focus of that, but the camera detects a face in the background, it will jump to the face, even though you're trying to focus on the something on the table. So it works, but I say it takes control away from you. So enable it and disable it if you find it's troublesome. So the different focusing modes, that SCM thing on your camera, all right? S is single focus, single actuation. Every time you half press the shutter button, it activates the focus, it racks the focus, it locks at that point. So if the camera is on S focus, all right, but you're shooting in burst mode. So even if you're shooting at 10 frames a second, all right, you're holding the button down, the focus is going to stay with the very first frame. It's going to stay because you've got the button pressed halfway down. So I'm shooting burst, 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 but the camera will not change focus. It's going to stay where it was with the first shot. So if you wanted to refocus as you're shooting, you need to go to the C mode. C means continuous. So the camera will continuously adjust the focus as your subject is moving, even when you're shooting burst modes or single shot, it doesn't matter, okay? Something called AF lock is exactly what it sounds like. If you are in continuous in the C focus mode, but you don't want it to change, you just have to push your thumb on the AF lock and just keep shooting, and the focus will not deviate from where it was when you press that. You can press it or hold it in. So there is a menu item, it's in button dial setting, and it can operate, the AF lock button can either be momentary, where it's as long as you're pressing, so it says on when pressing, you got to hold it, or it will act like a switch, which means you press it once, it will lock it, and then you have to press it a second time to unlock it. That's the way AFL works. Now, there is an item called pre-AF in many of the cameras, which be careful of. What it does, pre-AF, is tells the camera it's the equivalent of holding your shutter button halfway down all the time. The bad thing about that is it means the camera is in autofocus. It's hunting for autofocus constantly. I put the camera down on the table and I walk away. I have it hanging on my shoulder. With pre-AF on, it's racking focus 100% of the time. That hurts your battery life in a big way. It is necessary for things like when we're in webcam mode. So when the cameras are in webcam mode, there's no way to, if you want to do autofocus, you have to turn that on because there's no way for us to press the shutter button. So this tells the camera to have autofocus working. That's what pre-AF does. In the GFX systems, there's something called Rapid AF. I don't want to exactly, I don't want to pat ourselves on the back and say it makes things fast. The sensors on those, the 50S, the 50R, they're not super fast for autofocus. They're very accurate, but they're not super fast. What Rapid AF does is it tells the processor to hunt the focus points more frequently and try to acquire a little bit better. So it gives you about 10% autofocus. It does help a bit on the GFX 100, but the GFX 100 is so quick you don't need to bother with it. Sorry, throat's getting dry. Then there is the autofocus behaviors that are spot, zone, and multi. And I touched on that earlier. Remember, I talked about the word all. So the AF spot is one particular area on your screen, and you can change the size of that area a little bit, but not too much. And the way you do that is by way of pressing in the joystick. You don't hold it, just press it once, and the box turns green. For those of you that don't have the joystick, it's usually the up button on the back of the camera. That's usually the default button for AF. It activates that spot, turns it green, and now you can use the back wheel to make that area bigger and smaller. You can make it really, really tiny, and that's really selective. Like if you want to just shoot one flower in a whole field of flowers, that's really, really helpful. But changing the size of the box can also be good when you're shooting portraits. Let's say you're shooting headshots against a busy brick wall or against an iron fence or something like that. Well, you want to make sure that the camera is concentrating on the person's head and isn't being fooled by stuff in the background. If the box is too big, if you're standing back and the person's head isn't that large, isn't filling the frame, the focus sensors could detect that iron fence in the back and could want to lock on to the iron fence instead. So changing the size of the focus box can help, okay? Zone is a way to access more focus points, and it will jump around. And this is very handy if your person is moving around. I will tend to use this, say, for fashion photography. You can use it for sports as well. And what the camera does is the camera detects what it is, and as your subjects moves around inside this larger area, it will jump from point to point to point to keep that subject locked on. Okay. The multi, all right, something called multi goes to the entire sensor, and it will automatically jump from point to point across the entire sensor of the camera. And it defaults to whatever is closest to the camera. Now, the multi is really good at tracking. The multi will lock onto you and follow you across the entire screen. Okay, but just so you know, it will default to whatever's closest. But that's the difference between spot, zone, and multi. And when you have it on that all, that simply lets you scroll through all three of those without having to hit the AF button or going into the quick menu. Now, in continuous autofocus, as it implies, as long as you hold the button down, it's the sensor is continuously reacquiring, and the processor is continuously going back to stuff. You can change the behavior in the AFC custom functions for different kinds of subject matter. And this one is one I use a lot: ignore obstacles. This is definitely, say, something like if you're shooting, say, BMX, where you've got bikers that might be moving, or if you're, say, at a skate park and there may be objects, there's people moving in front of you and things like that, and you want the camera to momentarily ignore behavior that's happening in front, and so you're delaying the autofocus. That's a good one, but there's many different options. Play with them and see what works for you. Okay, the number of focus points in your menu. This one can mislead you a little bit. So on the X-T4, for example, we have 425 focus points on the camera, all right? Corner to corner, that's a lot. So there's this item that says number of focus points, 425, or I can go to it and I can change it to 117. Well, that makes you think that 117 is worse than a 425. No, the 425, they're still there, and the camera is still using them. What this menu item is showing you is what is being shown on the screen. So this bottom image on the slide is showing you what it looks like at 117. There are still points in between all of those, okay? But this makes it faster for me to move that box around. If you have 425 selected, then when you use the joystick or your touchscreen to move the box, it's going to go to each single one of those little ones in between on the way to getting to your destination. So it's much, much slower to move the box around. So I suggest set it to 117. Don't let that 425 make you think you're somehow getting inferior autofocus. You're not. The joystick lever, which I forgot what our official nomenclature is, but I think it's called the autofocus lever. But the joystick, most people call it, it can be locked and unlocked, which is handy if you want to give the camera to somebody else and you don't want them to move the focus spot, which they can do by accident. All you got to do is press it in, hold it for 5 seconds, and you will get a pop-up screen, all right, that gives you an option for A, push to unlock, or it will turn it off altogether. When it's in the off setting, you can't move the joystick left or right at all. All right. When it's on the lock setting, you can unlock it momentarily. But on the off setting, to get it back to normal operation, you just hold it in for 3 seconds. But this is a good way if you, like again, so if you want to give it to one of your kids and you don't want them moving it around, that's very, very handy. There is a cool menu item in some of the cameras called Store AF Mode by orientation. And this is a really nice, smart, intelligent thing, but if you turn it on, it might drive you crazy, but I like it. If you're, say, a wedding photographer doing a lot of fashion, what this means is it's not talking about sexual orientation, it's talking about landscape versus portrait, landscape versus portrait. So when that is enabled, the camera, wherever you had your autofocus point positioned in a particular orientation, the camera will jump back to that spot. So think wedding photography, you're shooting group shots, a lot of group shots in the horizontal position, and then you're going to do portraits of the bride or the groom, okay? And with the portrait mode, you obviously usually want the AF spot higher up in the frame. So this will remember where it was and it will automatically jump to that so you don't have to keep moving it back and forth. But again, when it's on, it does it automatically. So if you find it's always jumping to the same point and you forgot, turn it off and then it won't bother you. But it's definitely a helpful tool. So a lot of our cameras now have touch screens. You can set up the touch screens, like I said, are considered button functions because they do stuff, all right? You can designate what part of the touchscreen you want to be active in the touchscreen settings, which is down in the menu, in the wrench, button dial setup. You can have only one part of the touchscreen active, and this prevents you from, say, accidentally moving stuff around with your nose. You can turn the touchscreen off completely if it's bothering you. Now, also with the touchscreen, when it's turned on some cameras, you may, in the upper right corner, see a tab, all right? See a tab that says, it's a little tiny gray box, and it will say off, or it'll say auto, or it will say area. This little tab is to tell the touchscreen how to behave for focus. So if it says area, that simply means, so when you touch that little box, it will change what it says. If it says area, that basically means where you touch on the screen, the autofocus point will move to that. This is instead of using the joystick. If it says AF, then what it will do is it will move to that area, and it will also activate the autofocus. It will actually rack focus to that area. And if it says shot, that means it will move the focus point, do the autofocus, and take the picture. All right. I frequently turn mine off and leave it off. One of the downsides of having this is, again, you could be using your nose without knowing it to move the AF point around. So if you set this to off, it won't be there. Now, that tab, remember early on, I told you about display custom settings and the little check boxes, right? This little tab, this little touchscreen tab, you can make it disappear from the screen so you will never enable it in that display custom settings checkbox thing. So if you uncheck this, it goes away. However, whatever setting it was at, that's the way it will stay. So if you have it set to shot mode and then go into your display custom settings and uncheck it, the screen, it will still be a touch screen and it will still take the shot over and over again. What you've done is you've gotten rid of this little box. So you'll have to go back into display custom settings, re-enable it, turn it off, and then make it go away again. If you've been looking at the screen while I've been talking in terms of face detection settings, they're pretty straightforward. You can have it either detect the whole face, or you can have it prioritize a certain eye, and this really does work. But again, like I said, when that's on, sometimes it takes control away from you, and you may not want that. The drive settings. So with the T series that have the ISO settings over here on the left side, right? The drive is underneath, okay? It's this rotating collar that's underneath. On some of the cameras, like on the T30s, the T10, T20, the drive is right here. It's this rotating thing because there is no ISO knob, so that is replaced by the drive settings. And now in the menu also, there is a menu for certain drive setting options. So things like if I have, this is the XT4, if I have it set to continuous high, all right, I need to go into the menu and tell it which speed I want continuous high to be. Now the XT4, this thing's a real screamer with the new shutter that's in here. This will go up to 15 frames a second in mechanical shutter mode. All right. That's absolutely state of the art right now, mechanical shutter mode. So if that's what I want, I have to go into the menu first and set it for 15 FPS. But if I instead want 20 FPS, I set it to 20. When I go to CH, it will be 20 FPS. But notice to the right of the 20 and those other settings, there's the letters ES. I can only get 20 frames per second if I'm in electronic shutter. In mechanical shutter, I can't get it. So that means I also have to change my shutter type. Now, as long as I'm on this topic, so notice I've got the other settings that let me have a cropped picture. I can get up to 30 frames a second with the H1, the T3, the T4, and get up to 30 frames a second with electronic shutter. However, it's going to reduce my resolution a little bit. So it's going to crop in the sensor 25%, and you'll see it on the screen, and it will drop from 24 megapixels down to 18 megapixels. But it will get you up to 30 frames a second, which is really pretty amazing. And depending on the size of your buffer, you may fill the buffer very quickly or may not. But obviously, if you're doing high-speed bursts, this is where using those UHS-2 cards I told you about is a real benefit, okay? Some of the different bracket settings. So again, this is part of our drive mode. If you go to the letters BKT, all right, this means your camera, when you hit the button, is going to do some kind of a bracket. On the, here's the T30. In the drive mode, you will notice there is a BKT1, there's a BKT1 and a BKT2. All right, that's kind of cool. So you have a choice of two. With the T3s, the T4s, you actually don't have, you only have one. So what you would do first is you go into the menu, go into the drive settings, go to bracket setting, you go to the right, and you're going to tell it what kind of bracket you want it to perform. And you have choices: auto exposure, white balance, film simulation is one of my favorites. So first you tell it what kind you want it to perform. Then you need to go back to the left, and now you go into what is called the bracket advanced setting. This is another menu item underneath that. And now you're going to specify exactly what you mean by ISO bracket or white balance bracket. You're going to set the parameters that that bracket is going to work within. So let's do film simulation bracket, which is one of my favorites. It means when I set that, I can, film simulation bracket is, I press the button once, just one press, the camera takes one shot and then gives me 3 different files, 3 different film simulation process files at a one click. Really a lot of fun. Now, when I go into here, I'm going to tell the camera what those 3 are. So I could have one that's Velvia, I could have one that's Eterna, and I could have one that's Sepia. So this is how you set it up. So whenever I go to bracket, I want to shoot film simulation bracket, it's going to give me those 3 renditions. So that's what the setup, the sub setup is inside there. Some of the newer camera, like the T4, the X Pro 3, the X100V, now have a new HDR mode. There is dynamic range. I'm going to get to that. This is the special one that's actually labeled HDR mode. What this does is it very, very quickly, it does an extremely fast burst in camera. It's so fast that you can hand hold it. I wouldn't try to do, not while you're moving it, but in hand holding, you will get it. It's going to take 3 different RAW files. It's going to take the RAW files, process them together, align them, and give you an HDR picture. And it's beautiful, and it works in camera, right? And this won't do it with RAW files. It's only going to do it when you're with the JPEG mode. But it's really incredibly good. So I'm hoping most of you are looking at this on some kind of a decent computer monitor and can see this. This is a handheld shot. And you can see the incredible amount of extra shadow detail that I get underneath those stairwells. And even on the left side of the screen where there's that wood railing, look how much brighter that wood railing got. Now, what you can't tell, unfortunately, through the PowerPoint and through the Zoom and everything is in the skylight, on the actual file, the tonality of the highlight areas is much better as well. So I get many more panels that have a blue rendition instead of a white, instead of being white and blown out. So the HDR really, really does work, okay? The other thing now is we've got some new stuff. We have multi-exposure. Now we've had multi-exposure for quite a while. So this is an XT2, and on the drive, underneath the drive, it's the thing to the right of the letter S, and it simply shows 2 little rectangles, and they overlap. All right, and it's the same on a lot of the other cameras. This is the multiple exposure, and the old ones were simple. You took one picture, and then you could take another one, and it would save them together. Something I've gotten to have a real lot of fun with on the new cameras, and in particular with the T4 and the T Pro 3, is you can now do up to 9 frames, and you can choose the choice of blend modes. So blend modes, just like you would do with layers in Photoshop, the blend modes that the camera uses to determine whether to prioritize bright tones or dark tones, or how it's going to merge those levels together. So look for that in your menu. It's under the camera. It's called multiple exposure. And now when I turn on in the camera, now on the X-T4, I actually have to enable it in the menu, okay? But when that's enabled, you can do a lot of cool stuff like this. So this is just a couple of examples I did in my backyard. One is just a statue of this little Cupid superimposed with a couple of shots of flowers. And I think it was with the bright setting, all right? The one on the shot, which is kind of bizarre looking, is my daughter superimposed on the face of a lion that I have in a fountain in my backyard. And this was used with the average setting, all right? So it's really, really cool. If you look in the upper right of the screen, I put up a name there. I really want you to go to this woman's website, check out her work. Her name's Suzanne Stein. She's a New York City street photographer, uses our cameras. Her work is beyond the fact that it's brilliant. She does unbelievable multiple exposure stuff on the streets of New York. She's got an incredible mind that she will see a picture, she will see stuff, and she will figure out in her head immediately how she wants to overlay stuff. And she will grab a picture and quickly grab another one and does this incredible multiple exposure stuff of street photography. And that's really hard. Check out Suzanne Stein, okay? She's from New York City. You'll love her multiple exposure stuff. I'm bringing this item up because it doesn't exist anymore in the menus, but for those of you that had the T1, I think it was still in the T2, it was something called sound and flash off. And then we renamed it to silent mode. And I want you to know that what this was for was to protect you if you're a wedding photographer from accidentally disrupting the performance, the ceremony with your flash, or having a camera do any kind of beeping noises or anything. So if you turned it on, it would kill the hot shoe completely. It would kill any built-in flash you had and would make sure the camera made no beeping noises whatsoever. But the problem was, like I said, if you turned it on, it would stop the flash from going off, even an external hot shoe flash. So this would frustrate people because the camera's not firing. So be aware of what that is. Silent mode. If you have it and your flash isn't firing, it's because you have it turned on, okay? Something called the Sports Finder mode in some of our new cameras. This is helpful. So one of the favorite things that people like about the X100F, hang on a second, is the X100T, the F, the V, is that this has a hybrid viewfinder. It has an optical window, and you could see that I'm actually letting light through that optical window. So I can look through this and I can see an actual optical image through this viewfinder with electronic stuff superimposed. But what's really cool about that is I can actually see outside the frame lens. This camera is a fixed 23mm lens. The optical viewfinder lets me see outside the frame lines, which is really good for street photography because you can see when somebody is about to get into your shot. Well, that's what the Sports Finder is. So the Sports Finder is helpful for that same purpose, but this is now think football or think soccer, where you're trying to concentrate at a particular some action, but there's a player that's about to run into your picture. This lets you see outside the frame line. However, it's limited to electronic shutter only, and it has to be in high-speed burst. So, no, I'm sorry, the mechanical shutter only. Sports Finder is mechanical shutter only. But it lets you see outside the frame line, but it will actually capture a smaller number of pixels. So it's like that high-speed burst. So it's going to reduce your resolution, but it will display outside the frame line. There's something called the pre-shot mode, which is electronic shutter only. But what it is kind of cool, and the best example I can think of is trying to get a picture of a butterfly and trying to capture a butterfly as it takes off. It's totally unpredictable. If you try to do it manually, you will miss it every single time because they're that fast. Pre-shot mode helps you with that. So what you do is you sit there, you line up, you focus, you just watch the butterfly, you hold the button halfway down, and as you're holding it halfway down, the camera is recording pictures. It's recording, it's recording, it's recording. And then as soon as the butterfly takes off, you press it all the way down just for an instant. And what it does is the camera will memorize the moment that you pressed all the way down, and it will write to the file a bunch of pictures before the moment and then a bunch of pictures after the moment. Okay? So you have a full continuous string of files that show you the whole chain.
Pretty much all I take.
Sorry? Sorry? Kate?
Accidentally in my earbud. It's okay, it's okay. Sorry, I accidentally touched my ear.
All right, all right, all right. Anyway,
since I have you, I just wanted to let you know it's a 1:45. So I wanted to let you know this is our 15-minute warning. Most of the questions we've gotten so far, either Lewis or myself have been answering via the chat. But I wanted to let you know we have about 15 minutes left. So.
Okay. So I'm the techie geek stuff, I may not have time unless you want me to run over, and that's your call. But I've still got some more. I'm getting pretty much to the end of it. So, but the techie geek stuff I might not get to. So contrast control. Let me explain what dynamic range is. Dynamic range really works. There's something called 100, 200, 400, and it's ISO dependent. And what it does is it's a bit of a processing trick. Other camera manufacturers do similar things under different names, but it really works, and it's incredibly helpful for your highlight tones. So in this picture, like, think of saving the highlights for clouds. Think of the highlights in a white wedding dress, for example, all right? Setting it to the higher dynamic range, and I just leave it at auto, but the higher you go up from your base point. So if I have a camera that's ISO 200 native, if I go to ISO 800, this will give me 2 stops extra highlight latitude. And it's an exposure processing trick. It basically underexposes the picture to preserve the highlight, and then it bumps the shadow values up to bring that up. It really works. Do you get more noise? You get about this much more noise, okay? It's barely noticeable, but the amount of extra highlight detail you get is really impressive. I don't know if, again, what kind of screen you're looking at, but this is the difference between 100% and 400%. This is different than the HDR thing, all right? Because this, you don't have to do this won't do triple frame capture. This is all just internal processing, but it really, really does work. There's also settings labeled H and S that are highlight and shadow. Those change the shape of the tone curve, okay? And they're limited, but they do help. So these will actually work on top of the dynamic range. So if you're a pure raw file shooter, just don't worry about it, because you have all that manipulation room with your raw file. But if you are shooting JPEGs, and I like to do that, this is very helpful for you to dial in your tonality a little bit better. I want to say something about the S setting, the shadow setting is, to our engineers, minus shadow means less shadow. So that means it's a brighter shadow. Okay, so -1, -2 on the shadow setting brightens your shadows. Okay, and I got no problem with using this from once in a while, and it works. I have no idea if you can see the reproduction of the shot of the cat. I did this, a quick grab of 3 different dynamic ranges, but there's a huge difference between the amount of fur detail in the 400% versus the 100%, but I don't know if you'll see it, so I'm going to skip over it. This really also works for colors. Now, why am I making a big deal about this? Because of skin tones, all right? So imagine a backlight, or imagine sunlight or a spotlight hitting somebody's forehead and you get that hot spot. More dynamic range on skin tone will keep that from blowing out. And that's really, really important. We don't want blown out, pure white skin tones. Okay, so please experiment with that, learn to use it. Some video cinema stuff. Kate, quick question for you.
Yes, sir. What you got?
Do you want me to go into cinema stuff, or would you rather I talk about raw file processing, software, stuff like that?
Let's talk about the raw file stuff, because we have that other series that we're going to be hosting. So let's hold the cinema stuff for when we do that whole cinema series. Let's do that.
All right. Jump to my PowerPoint real quick. So here's something you guys can look. We're going to do a cinema series next month, but there's also on the YouTube channel, the Fuji guys, I got a 30-minute thing that explains stuff in general. So we're going to skip some of the button stuff. All right, let me explain real quickly some stuff you need to know about how raw files work and where they are. So every single time you take a photo on your camera, no matter what camera it is, even on your cell phone, a raw file is created. That's the first thing that happens, is a raw file is created. And then the camera internally very quickly reads the data off that raw file and turns it into something viewable. You cannot see a raw file. A raw file is not a photographic image. You can't see it. It's just a bunch of voltage values that correspond to different spots on the sensor. It has to be known as demosaicked, okay, or debayered. So the word Bayer refers to a particular kind of red, green, blue pattern that other camera manufacturers use. We don't use it. We use our own. We use something called the X-trans, which is a more random pattern. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because your software, whether it's Adobe or Capture One or Luminar or something like that, has to take the raw file and has to apply a demosaicing bunch of mathematics to make sense of which pixel is blue and which pixel is red. So the software does that on its own, has nothing to do with us. With us, we do it in camera. All right. So when you get a JPEG, that's us doing our own internal demosaicing and turning it into a JPEG file. So like I said, all files will start out as a raw file. And you have lots of choices for how to process that in software. It's up to you. There are a lot of them are good. They basically depend on the interface, whether you like it. Some of them have subscription models. Some of them are a one-time purchase. I'm not really here to recommend one or another. So there's something something that I will have to point out. Something was called SilkyPix. It's not made by us. It was a third-party company. It used to be our default processor that we would bundle and stuff like that. It is no longer our default processor. However, for those of you that have it and use it, you can still download it. You can still use it. It does get updated, but we no longer simply call it out by default. We have in-camera raw conversion, which is really simple, really work. If you want to bypass all that stuff, but you still want the flexibility of shooting raw because you're not sure what you want to do with it, you can do in-camera raw conversion. So you shoot a raw file, you go to playback, all right? And now when you're in playback mode, you press the menu button, and you will get the playback menu. And you choose raw conversion. So you go into raw conversion and you have these options on the right that you'll see. And you go up and down, you can choose different things. You can choose the white balance. You can choose the film simulation. You can choose how much highlight and shadow to do. All right. And then you press the Q button, like it says, and it will create a preview. And then the camera will prompt you. If you like it, you just press menu OK, and it takes that file and it saves it to your SD card. Super fun stuff to do when you're sitting in a coffee shop. All right. And you want to experiment with your files, and you don't want to have to do stuff later on the computer. Now, this is using the in-camera processor, which is not a 16-bit processor. So if you really have really terrible highlight issues or major white balance issues, you're better off doing it back on your computer. But it is 12-bit processing, so it's really pretty good. You still get really, really good results. We have something called XRAW Studio. This is an unusual piece of software, but it really works. It's 100% free. And this is takes cameras, and you will take your camera and you will actually plug your camera into your laptop, and it uses the processor built into the camera, not the processor in your computer. And the reason we do that is because this way you can get our exact film simulation rendering. The film simulation rendering, and this is not a slam on anybody, don't misinterpret what I'm about to say. The film simulation rendering that you get from Adobe or Capture One or Luminar or any of those others are backwards engineered by the software engineers themselves, not us. Our color science is our proprietary secret sauce, okay? We know our film types. We know how to make film types look good. So we build that into our cameras, and we don't give that to nobody unless you get XRAW Studio. And this way you get it through the camera. It's a little unusual, but it does work. But I did want you to know that you will get a film sim mismatch when you import raw files and JPEGs together into some of the softwares, okay? But this is what the interface for XRAW Studio looks like. You know, it's pretty straightforward, and you click convert, but it does have to have a camera actually connected to the laptop. So I say there's nothing wrong with shooting JPEG. If I had the time, I could give you a long list of hundreds of professional photographers that shoot JPEG only because they don't have time to be screwing around with playing raw files. I'm not here to tell you one way or the other. I can tell you from a personal experience, I've been a photographer for almost 40 years. I almost never shoot raw anymore because I really just don't want to bother, because with a mirrorless camera, you've got the exposure preview, right? I changed the shutter speed. I changed my f-stop. I changed my ISO. I changed my film sim. What I see in the viewfinder is going to be like 90% of what my final file is. I don't have to worry about it not being exposed properly. I don't have to worry about my white balance being wrong. I'm going to see it in the camera. That is so much peace of mind. And for those of you that I said have not tried our film simulations, if you've been just a raw file shooter all this time up until today, I'm saying here's an experiment. Set the camera to save both raw and JPEG together. Okay, do it for a month. And then at the end of the month, as you go through all your work, ask yourself, how many times did you actually end up going to the raw file? I am willing to bet you found yourself unbelievably pleased with the JPEG reproduction that comes out of our cameras. Okay, it's really fantastic. So that's why I said, my thing is like, yes, JPEG is like a frozen pizza, but you can still put stuff on a frozen pizza. Don't be fooled into thinking you cannot manipulate a JPEG file. You can. You can do exposure adjustments. Yes, you can do white balance adjustments, okay? You just can't do as much as you can with a raw file, but don't be afraid of JPEG, okay? Watch your exposure. So this is the big thing. If you really whack out exposure on the JPEG file, then you're in trouble. You may not be able to save it. But again, like I said, you've got exposure preview. You've got a histogram right on the screen of your camera. You're not going to make a mistake. I was going to talk about, so real quickly, I'm going to talk about high-speed flash sync so you understand what that is, all right? A lot of our new flashes, and we have a new flash coming on the market soon. But there are existing flashes that will do high-speed flash sync. What this is strobe, because it's so fast, it's like almost always like a 2,000th of a second. It's usually faster than your shutter speed. So setting your shutter speed is pretty much irrelevant to what the light is that comes out of the strobe. So like in this particular situation, this girl standing in the shade with a flash in an umbrella, what's hitting her is completely and totally dictated by the power of the flash. But way off in the background where all the sunlight, okay, the strobe is not lighting that background. The only way for me to control the lighting in the background is by way of the shutter speed. So even if I go to a 2,000th of a second, because the girl is being lit almost exclusively by flash, changing the shutter speed does not change the exposure on the girl. But it does change what happens in the background. And this is what high-speed sync. So we call it in the menu setting, it's called FP sync. And you have to have a strobe that is capable of high-speed sync. There are several vendors on the market, Godox, Profoto, Elinchrom, like I said, ours, Nissan, there's various different manufacturers. But something that's really cool with the X100 series, these guys, the X100 STFV, these have a leaf shutter. It's not a curtain. These have a shutter that opens and closes like that, like the Iris. That leaf shutter, you're able to do high-speed flash sync without any fancy flash. Anything that you put on the hot shoe, okay, just by way of a connector, I can do high-speed sync all the way to a 4,000th of a second with any old, stupid 30-year-old flash with the X100 cameras. That's a really, really good thing about these cameras. So we are at 159 as far as I can tell. So I will stop the share.
We have audio. Michael, one quick question that just came in, and I know you talked about white balance a little bit a long time ago. I know on the XT4, I think there's some new white balance options. So there's Auto W, Auto A.
Yeah.
Could you talk about the differences between the new options that are in the XT4? And are those also in the X100V?
No, they're not in the X100V.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't think so. No.
Well, I know I'm asking. Devin's got his X100V.
No.
I wasn't sure.
They are only in the T4 right now.
Okay.
The Pro 3. So
Okay.
They are nuances. How to describe it? So what's just called auto looks at the entire scene. It evaluates everything that it sees in a picture and just tries to give you what is considered, what our color scientists consider the nicest, most pleasing overall white balance. It's designed to give you a subjectively pleasing look. Works very nice. It's the same thing that we've been using for years, okay?
Right.
There's one called auto white balance, what is it called? Neutral? I already forgot what it's called.
Version? I can't remember. It's been a while since I used the XT4, so I can't remember exactly.
Yeah. There's one called, here it is, I'm looking at it. White Priority, White Priority, okay? This one is designed to give you the most absolutely neutral white balance possible. So it's trying to give you the cleanest, most perfect white or gray that it can find from inside the image, okay? The other one that's called Ambience Priority, all right, is going to evaluate the lights, the actual ambient light setting, and it's going to skew the white balance to try to match whatever the ambient light setting is. So if you're shooting in tungsten, it's going to try to give you an overall warmer look because it says, oh, you're shooting under tungsten light. So it's going to skew the white balance a little bit towards that warmer setting.
Okay. So my suggestion to Sam, who asked that question, would be go, play around with each of those settings so you can really see what the differences are in different lighting scenarios and that kind of thing. It is a new feature on the X-T4 and the X Pro 3, it sounds like. So go try each one and look at those images and see what it's doing, for sure.
Go to you can find that stuff on our website, but honestly, I don't really know why they put it in there. I know Tokyo will kill me for saying this, but they're nuances. The differences are kind of subtle. Yeah. I would say, unless you really, 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 really want to play around with it because you got nothing else to do, just leave it on the regular auto all the time. Having said that, I'll just go on to white balance real quickly. All of them in the auto white balance, when you go into that menu, you go to the right, you can set an offset. So if you want all of your pictures on auto to be slightly warmer or slightly cooler or whatever overall, you can put in an offset that will affect every single picture when you're in auto white balance.
Right, and that's normally a feature that because I teach a different class on just kind of getting started with these cameras too, and that's normally a feature when you see that little grid come up with the colors, and you're rolling around in there, just be careful because it will affect, all of your images. The last time I was in New York, I realized I'd slightly touched that, and all of my photos from Brooklyn looked a little pink, and it is an easy fix. But, that's one less thing to worry about in post-production. So anyhow, watch those buttons sometimes, they get you into trouble. So when things look weird, it means somewhere you set a setting differently. and it doesn't automatically go back. You have to put it back to where it started from. So,
and remember, if you mess your camera up or you give your camera to somebody and they mess it up for you, all you got to do is go into menu, go down to the wrench. All right, go down here to user setting, and at the bottom of user setting is something that says reset, okay? And you can just set your camera back to default.
Yeah,
right? You can start
I've definitely had to do that a couple of times because sometimes you're just like, why can't I do this one thing? And then you're scrolling through the menus, you can't figure it out, and sometimes that's just the easiest thing to do. So, there's always a way. That's the ultimate undo, basically. So I'm going to wrap this up. First of all, Michael, thank you so much for all of that information on the Fuji X series cameras. I know it was a lot for people, and we had some great questions coming in. And between Lewis and myself, we got most of those answered in the chat. And Devin chimed in on some too. So great team effort here from all today. Lewis and Michael, of course, thank you so much for your time. For those of you tuning in, look for upcoming Fuji events. We're going to do a cinema series in the month of September. So that's going to be 3 sessions over a few weeks. We're going to kind of dive into different elements of cinema. And then in October, like he said, we're going to do a different take on a photography course. So keep an eye on our upcoming events at glazerscamera.com/workshops. And before I let everybody go, I do want to just take a moment to talk about how Glazers is operating right now. We are open Monday through Saturday. Our hours, Monday through Friday, are 9 to 6. On Saturdays, it's 9 to 5. And you can come in and shop in person. We are limiting how many people are in the store at any given time. We are asking that people wear masks. We have them available if you don't have one, and all that good stuff, because we want everyone to have a nice, safe shopping experience. You can also place your orders online. We do free shipping for orders over $49 with some restrictions applied, of course. And you can also just do curbside pickup. I also want to share that our rentals department is now up and running. It's been open for a while. It's not open for customers to walk in and place their rental orders. So if you are ready to rent again, call in advance, book your rental, and then they'll do curbside pickup Monday through Friday, 9 to 6 to get you your rentals. So Michael, Lewis, everyone at Fuji, thank you again so much for your time and energy and info. We are grateful as always. And to all of those who hung out with us this afternoon in the drizzly Seattle days, thanks for spending a couple hours with us and learning more about how to use your Fuji cameras.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a great afternoon.